When the surveyor told me my property line ran 6 feet into Karen's driveway, I thought he'd misread the map. Then I saw the orange flags he planted, right under her SUV tires, and realized the nightmare ahead. She wasn't going to take this like a normal neighbor. Karen didn't believe in boundaries, especially the literal kind. It all started when I bought the old lakeside ranch house last spring. The lot came with a narrow strip that curved along a shared driveway. It didn't matter to me then. Half of it was gravel and crabgrass, but it apparently mattered deeply to Karen, my neighbor with the bleached bob, designer tracksuits, and an HOA badge she wore like a sheriff's star. The day the moving truck arrived, she walked over holding a clipboard like she was inspecting an airport runway. "You'll need HOA approval for exterior changes," she said. I told her politely that the ranch wasn't part of the HOA anymore. The previous owner had opted out years ago. Her smile twitched like a cat about to hiss. "We'll see about that," she replied and marched off. For months, I ignored her. She left pamphlets about community standards, took pictures whenever I trimmed trees, and once slipped a violation notice under my door for having non-conforming mailbox height. I framed it in the hallway just to remind myself how ridiculous things could get. But the real war started the day I hired a surveyor. I wanted to install a small fence to keep deer out of my vegetable garden. Karen appeared before the poor guy could even unload his tripod. "You can't survey without HOA authorization," she snapped. The man blinked, unsure whether to laugh or apologize. I told her again, calmly, that my property wasn't under HOA jurisdiction. She called me combative. The surveyor finished, marked the line, and handed me a copy. That's when the trouble began. The next morning, every orange flag was gone. Not one gone. In their place were tire tracks. Karen's silver Lexus had clearly rolled over the area multiple times. She'd literally flattened the evidence. I walked next door and knocked. She opened the door just wide enough for me to smell the chlorine from her perfume. "Can I help you?" she asked sweetly. "Yeah," I said. My survey flags disappeared. "You wouldn't happen to know anything about that?" She laughed. "Oh, those little things? They were littering the driveway. I removed them. You're welcome. They marked my property line." "That's funny," she said, crossing her arms. "Because that driveway's been ours since the 80s. My husband poured it himself." "That's interesting," I replied. "Because the county says otherwise." Her smile froze. Then she said the line that defined the rest of the summer: "You can't just move in and rewrite history." From that moment, everything became a contest. She parked her SUV half on my side, blocking access to my tool shed. She told delivery drivers the address didn't exist. Once, she even threatened to tow my own truck for trespassing. I started documenting everything. Photos, timestamps, even video clips from my doorbell camera. Then came the day she crossed the line, literally. I returned home to find her standing on my lawn with a contractor, pointing at the ground. "We're expanding the driveway," she announced. "It's HOA approved." "You can't expand onto my lot," I said. She tilted her head. "Prove it." I didn't yell. Didn't argue. I just smiled, walked back inside, and opened my laptop. That evening, I filed a boundary encroachment notice with the county clerk and sent copies to the sheriff's office. I also emailed the survey map to Karen, CC'd to the HOA president, her ex-husband, as I later discovered, and the city zoning officer. The next morning, she retaliated. The orange flags reappeared, jammed crookedly into my yard, but several feet farther toward my house. She'd moved the entire line to her advantage, as if she could manifest a new map by sheer entitlement. I didn't touch them. I just stood there, coffee in hand, admiring the audacity. My dog Max sat beside me, tail wagging like he was watching a tennis match. "All right, Max," I said. "Game on." That's when I decided to build the fence. Not a simple picket fence, but a solid cedar structure with reinforced posts, officially placed along the true boundary line. I submitted the county permit, hired 2 workers, and bought materials. Karen saw the lumber truck arrive and immediately stormed over in yoga pants and fury. "What is that?" "A fence," I said. "You can't put that there. You'll block my car." "You mean your car that's parked on my property?" She went red. "This is harassment. You're targeting me because I'm a woman." "No," I said evenly. "I'm targeting you because you stole my property markers." Her voice rose to a shriek. "I'll call the HOA. Tell them to bring measuring tape," I said, and went back to unloading wood. For the next few days, she played dirty. She parked her SUV sideways, blocking delivery trucks. She yelled at the workers until they refused to come back. One evening, she blasted loud music from her garage, opera arias that echoed through the cul-de-sac like a vengeful ghost. That's when I realized logic wouldn't win this war. Karen thrived on reaction, and I was done giving her one. Instead, I went quiet, completely polite. I hired a new crew, one that worked early mornings when she was still asleep. The fence went up fast, each post sinking into concrete before she even realized it. By the time she noticed, it was too late. The line was sealed, the cedar panels up, and a fresh coat of stain gleamed in the afternoon sun. From her porch, it looked like a wall cutting straight through her precious driveway, because technically, it was. She came running out, phone in hand, screaming that I'd trapped her car. "This is illegal," she shouted. "You've destroyed my access." "Actually," I said calmly, "you've been parking illegally on my land for months. I just fixed that." She demanded I remove the fence immediately. I told her I'd gladly comply, once the county decided whose property it was. Until then, the fence stayed. That night, she left her Lexus parked in the street. The next morning, I found a handwritten note taped to my fence in perfect cursive. "This isn't over." I smiled, folded the note, and slipped it into my folder of evidence. Because I knew something Karen didn't. The fence was only the beginning. The county inspector had already called me. They'd reviewed my claim, and the case was now officially open for boundary violation. A hearing was scheduled in 2 weeks. Karen thought she could intimidate her way through bureaucracy. But she was about to learn that I play a long game, and mine always ends with paperwork, patience, and poetic justice. The morning after the fence went up, Karen was standing in her bathrobe, coffee mug shaking in her hand, staring at the cedar panels like she was witnessing a war crime. From my porch, it looked like she was performing a silent protest, barefoot, robe flapping, muttering to herself. I gave her a small wave. She didn't wave back. By noon, the first HOA representative showed up, a balding man named Jerry, clipboard in hand and the kind of cheap aviators that made him look like he was auditioning for mall security. He didn't even knock. He walked straight into my yard like he owned the place. "Sir, you've erected an unapproved structure within the HOA jurisdiction," he said in a practiced tone. I took a deep breath. "You might want to check your records, Jerry. My property's not part of the HOA." He frowned, rifling through papers. "Mrs. Hutchins says this subdivision falls under Lakeside Estates. Did she also tell you I have county documentation proving otherwise?" I handed him the survey and the opt-out letter from the previous owner. He adjusted his sunglasses and read it for all of 10 seconds before realizing he'd been sent on a wild goose chase. Karen appeared behind him, arms crossed. "He's manipulating you, Jerry. That's forged. I know people at zoning." Jerry looked between us, sighed, and muttered something about needing to confirm with the board. Then he left. Karen's glare could have melted steel. "You think you're clever," she hissed. "Clever would have been hiding the fence under camo netting," I said. "This is just practical." That night the drama spread. I noticed 3 of my neighbors standing in the street, whispering, gesturing toward the fence like it was a monument of division. One of them, a kind retired woman named June, waved me over later and whispered, "She's telling everyone you stole part of her driveway." I laughed. "Of course she is. She's collecting signatures," June added. "Petitioning the HOA to force you to remove it." The absurdity was almost admirable. Karen had lost control of reality but gained a campaign slogan. Over the next few days, I watched her go door to door with a clipboard, rallying anyone with a grudge against property lines. I even caught her filming a video on her phone, narrating dramatically about land theft and neighborhood safety. She uploaded it to the HOA Facebook group, tagging me by name. By the following morning, my inbox had 3 anonymous emails. "You're ruining the community. Move out if you hate neighbors." And my favorite, "You'll regret crossing the HOA." I decided it was time to even the scoreboard. That evening, I set up a trail camera near the fence line, motion activated, invisible at night. I'd learned my lesson about evidence. Sure enough, around midnight the alert pinged my phone. The footage showed Karen creeping out with a flashlight, trying to pry one of the fence panels loose. She gave up after a few minutes, probably realizing it was anchored in concrete. The next morning, I printed the still frame. Her, mid-pry, hair a mess, flashlight beam catching her face, and taped it to the fence with a note, "Smile for the camera." She didn't come outside for 2 days. But on the 3rd, she returned with reinforcements. Her ex-husband, the HOA president, arrived in a navy blazer despite the 90-degree heat. He strutted across the lawn like he was leading a congressional hearing. "Sir," he began, "this structure is causing safety concerns. Emergency vehicles can't access the cul-de-sac properly." I tilted my head. "The cul-de-sac that ends 50 feet before this fence?" He cleared his throat. "We're prepared to issue formal action." "Go ahead," I said. "Just make sure to file it with the county clerk so it's legally binding. Otherwise, it's just you two yelling on Facebook again." Karen's face twitched. He tugged her arm. "Let's go, dear," he muttered, already sweating. They retreated, but I knew this wasn't over. When narcissists lose control, they don't quit, they escalate. The next escalation came through bureaucracy. A week later, I got a letter from the city claiming an anonymous complaint about my fence violating setback requirements. They wanted photos, measurements, and a $200 reinspection fee. Cute. I submitted the documents, including the original permit signed by the city engineer. I also attached a flash drive labeled "Unauthorized Driveway Encroachment Footage." The city called me the next day, not to fine me, but to ask if they could use the footage for a zoning seminar on boundary dispute. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my phone. Karen, however, didn't find it funny. That afternoon, she stormed across the lawn and slammed her palm against the fence so hard it echoed. "You're ruining my life," she screamed. "Technically," I said, "I'm just protecting my property. You've humiliated me." "No, Karen," I said calmly. "You did that when you tried to unscrew a fence panel in your pajamas." She froze, realizing I'd seen the footage. Then she said quietly, almost trembling, "You think everyone's on your side? Wait until you see what I do next." And she meant it. 2 days later, a delivery truck arrived, cement mix, gravel, rebar. Karen had hired her own contractors to pour a brand new driveway across her lawn, looping around the fence. It looked like a racetrack for bad decisions. The crew shrugged when I asked for their permit. They said she'd told them it was approved. By sunset, they'd poured half of it. The next morning, the city inspector arrived, same guy who'd called me earlier. When he saw the concrete, he just shook his head. "This isn't permitted." "Who signed off?" "Her," I said. He scribbled something on a form. "We'll handle it." They did. 2 days later, the city issued her a stop-work order and fined her for unauthorized construction. The half-poured concrete hardened into a useless gray scar across her yard. She tried to chip it away herself, then gave up. That's when she pivoted from rage to victimhood. She started telling neighbors I was harassing a single woman. She even posted screenshots of our email exchanges, cropped to make it look like I was threatening her. Thankfully, I'd already saved the originals. So, I did what any logical person would. I printed her edited screenshots, stapled my real emails next to them, and mailed the packet anonymously to every house in the cul-de-sac. No commentary. Just receipt. The next morning, her social circle evaporated. The same people who'd signed her petition stopped waving when she walked by. I heard whispers about fake screenshots and embarrassing herself again. She didn't speak to me for a week. Then one morning, as I was loading my truck, she appeared quietly by the fence. For once, no shouting, no posturing, just quiet anger. "I just wanted this neighborhood to stay decent," she said. "You move in and suddenly it's chaos. Everyone's turning on each other." I looked at her for a long moment. "Karen, maybe the chaos was already here. You just needed a fence to see where it starts." She blinked, genuinely taken aback. Then she turned and walked away without another word. For a brief moment, I thought it was over. Then, 3 days later, I came home to find county surveyors on my lawn again. They told me there'd been a new boundary dispute filed, this time by Karen, claiming I'd extended my fence several feet into her parcel. It was completely false, but it meant another inspection, another delay, another round of paperwork. That's when I realized she wasn't trying to win. She was trying to exhaust me. Unfortunately for her, I thrive on patience. I'd already started a new plan, not revenge, just resolution with flair. Something that would end this feud so publicly that she'd never recover her authority. The fence wasn't the endgame anymore. It was the opening act. The county hearing was supposed to be a formality. Instead, it turned into a suburban circus. By the time I arrived, Karen was already in the parking lot surrounded by a small entourage, 3 neighbors, her ex-husband in another blazer, and a woman clutching a binder labeled HOA Legal. She'd clearly rehearsed for this. I parked 2 spots over, rolled down my window, and listened to her loudly declare that I was a land thief pretending to be a homeowner. When she saw me, she smiled in that tight, camera-ready way people do when they're about to perform. "See you inside, Mr. Boundary Bandit," she said, sipping from a stainless steel tumbler that probably contained more vodka than coffee. Inside the hall, folding chairs lined the room. A few curious locals had shown up for entertainment value. The county officer, an older man named Ramirez, called the session to order. Karen immediately jumped up like a contestant buzzing in on a game show. "I have documented proof," she said, waving papers so violently that one flew across the floor. "He falsified the property line survey." Ramirez adjusted his glasses. "Ma'am, please sit. We'll review each claim in turn." I stayed calm. My lawyer, a soft-spoken woman named Ellen, slid a folder forward. Inside were certified documents. The official survey, aerial drone photos, and time-stamped footage of Karen removing the markers weeks ago. When Ramirez played the footage, the room went dead quiet. On the projector, Karen appeared in her robe, flashlight in hand, tugging at an orange flag. Then she looked directly at the camera and muttered something that sounded suspiciously like, "That'll teach him." Her entourage stared at the screen, horrified. Karen turned beet red and said, "That's taken out of context." Ramirez didn't even respond. He simply clicked his pen. "Context won't change what we can see, Mrs. Hutchins." Ellen leaned toward me and whispered, "You're about to win this in under 10 minutes. And she was right. Ramirez confirmed the property markers, validated my fence permit, and concluded that the dispute was settled conclusively in Mr. Reed's favor. He also recommended the county fine Karen for filing a false boundary claim. It should have ended there. But Karen couldn't accept defeat quietly. She slammed her binder shut and declared, "This isn't over. You'll regret humiliating me," before storming out. The audience applauded. I didn't. I just sat there, feeling the strange hollowness of winning against someone who'd already lost their grip on reality. When I got home, I found something new waiting on my porch, a letter. No envelope, no return address, just block letters written in Sharpie, "Check your fence." I walked outside with my flashlight. The cedar panels looked fine at first. But then I noticed it. One post halfway down had been splashed with something sticky. Gasoline. She'd tried to start a fire, and the rain had put it out before it spread. That was my breaking point. I called the sheriff's office. Deputies came within the hour, photographed the scene, and took a statement. They knew her. Apparently, she'd been on record before for community disturbances. They promised to handle it quietly, but I knew Karen. Quiet wasn't her style. 2 days later, she was back outside, smiling like nothing had happened. She waved as if we were old friends. "Beautiful day, huh?" she said, standing in front of the same fence she'd nearly torched. I wanted to scream. Instead, I smiled. It really is. Because I had a plan. The next weekend, the HOA scheduled its annual community barbecue, a big event with food trucks, raffle prizes, and a speech from the president, Karen's ex-husband, Harold. Normally I skip these things. This year, I reserved a vendor booth. I told the event organizer I wanted to promote local home improvement services. That was technically true. When the day came, I set up my booth right near the entrance. A big banner read, "Know Your Property Rights, Free Boundary Surveys Explained." On one side, I displayed laminated copies of county map. On the other, blown-up photos of the fence incident as educational examples. No names, just images labeled Case Study A, Unauthorized Encroachment. The first few neighbors who walked by laughed. They knew exactly whose robe was in that blurry night photo. Within an hour, half the barbecue was buzzing about it. Harold approached, face pale, and hissed, "You're provoking her." "Provoking?" I said. "I'm educating." When Karen finally arrived, wearing a wide-brimmed hat and sunglasses, she froze. The color drained from her face as she recognized herself on the display board. The entire crowd turned subtly to watch her reaction. "You have no right to post that," she snapped. "Public record," I said, handing her a printed copy of the county's open access policy. She crumpled it in her hand. "You're obsessed with me." "Actually," I said, "I'm obsessed with accurate surveying." That line broke the crowd. People laughed. Even Harold smirked before pretending to cough. Karen fled the event, but the damage was done. By the next day, her HOA allies were dropping her from group chat. A week later, I heard she'd been asked to step back from leadership roles. She responded by sending a neighborhood-wide email titled, "The Truth About My Fence," a 10-paragraph manifesto blaming me, the county, and deep corruption in zoning enforcement. It was so unhinged that even her closest friend, June, called me afterward just to say, "She's lost it." I wanted to move on, but life with Karen never allowed peace. One night, I caught her sneaking around the back of my property again, this time with a measuring tape. I turned on the floodlight and called out, "Lose something?" She flinched. "Just verifying the setback." "At 1 in the morning? Don't flatter yourself," she snapped and stormed off. The next morning, a new sign appeared on her lawn. "Private driveway, trespassers will be reported." The irony was beautiful. The driveway now ended abruptly at my fence, like a road to nowhere. But then came something unexpected. A letter from the sheriff's office. Not a complaint, but a request. They were finalizing the vandalism case, and wanted to know if I intended to press charges. I thought about it long and hard. I could end her campaign with one signature. But that felt too easy, too final. I wanted her to face consequences she couldn't spin into victimhood. So I declined to press charges, and instead, I filed something quieter. A small claims petition for damages caused by her interference. Reinstallation fees, legal costs, and lost property use. It wasn't about money. It was about setting a record. Something official she couldn't erase. When the papers were served, she came to my door for the first time since the fire incident. She didn't yell. She didn't even look angry. Just tired. "Why are you doing this?" she asked softly. "Because boundaries exist for a reason," I said. "And you've spent months proving why they matter." She shook her head. "You don't understand what it's like to lose control. This neighborhood was perfect before you came. I think maybe it wasn't perfect, I replied. You just made sure no one else noticed the cracks. For the first time, she didn't have a comeback. She just turned and left. 2 weeks later, she didn't show up in court. The judge ruled in my favor by default. The ruling included a formal finding that Karen Hutchins knowingly interfered with lawful property use. It wasn't jail time. It was worse for her. It was paperwork. Permanent, public, searchable. I thought it was finally over. But that night, as I stood by the fence sipping coffee, I saw something glinting under the moonlight. The metal stakes of her abandoned new driveway, half buried in her lawn, leading right toward my property. And for the first time, I realized she wasn't finished. Some battles end with surrender. Others just go underground. I went to bed wondering which one this would be. The morning I woke to the sound of sirens, I knew instantly it had something to do with Karen. Sirens had become her background music, whether from her noise complaint calls or the suspicious vehicle reports she filed whenever I had guessed. But this time, they stopped right outside her house. I stepped onto the porch with my coffee and saw 2 patrol cars, lights flashing, officers speaking to Karen on her lawn. She was crying into her hands, makeup streaking, hair undone, wearing what looked like an expensive nightgown. I thought, for one irrational second, that something serious had happened, until one of the officers waved me over. "Mr. Reed," he asked, "you own the property next door?" I nodded. "We got a report of stolen construction equipment. Your neighbor says you took her rebar and cement mixer." I almost laughed out loud. "She doesn't even have a permit for construction." Karen dropped her hands and glared. "You did. You took it to sabotage my driveway again." "Ma'am," the officer said gently, "we've already checked his yard. Nothing's there." Her expression crumbled into disbelief. "You didn't look hard enough." I took a slow sip of coffee. "Karen, the only thing I've stolen from you is your peace of mind." That got a few chuckles from the officers. One whispered something into his shoulder radio. They left her standing there, trembling with rage, as the patrol cars rolled away. I went back inside, thinking that might be the last straw, that even she would realize how absurd things had become. But that afternoon, a drone appeared over my backyard. A small consumer drone, silver and buzzing like a mosquito, hovering directly above the fence. It dipped, rose, and spun as if searching for something. I walked out and looked straight into the lens. The drone tilted slightly, like it was acknowledging me, then zipped back toward her house. That night, I heard the faint whirring again, this time outside my living room window. I opened the blinds and saw its blinking red lights staring back. I stepped outside, held up a broom, and smacked it out of the air like a tennis serve. The thing crashed into the grass, propeller spinning uselessly. I picked it up, still humming, and noticed a label on the bottom. Property of Hutchins HOA Security Division. That was it. I called my lawyer. She called the sheriff. The next morning, I filed a harassment complaint with attached video evidence from my own security system showing the drone peering into my windows. Karen's private HOA security excuse didn't hold. The sheriff's department issued her a formal warning for stalking and illegal surveillance. The entire neighborhood knew by sunset. The HOA Facebook page exploded. People posted screenshots of the drone warning, memes about Karen air surveillance, and someone even photoshopped her face onto a spy satellite. For the first time, I thought maybe the tide had fully turned. She'd humiliated herself so thoroughly that surely she'd retreat. But I underestimated how far entitlement goes when it's cornered. The following week, a local news crew showed up. Channel 7 Action News parked right in front of my mailbox. The reporter introduced herself, microphone in hand. "Mr. Reed, we're doing a piece on suburban property disputes gone viral. Your neighbor reached out to us." I almost laughed. Of course she did. Karen emerged from her house wearing a crisp white blouse and pearl earrings, looking every bit the victim. She stood on her lawn and spoke dramatically about harassment, intimidation, and privacy invasion. The reporter nodded solemnly. Then they asked for my comment. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't insult her. I simply said, everything she's accused me of doing is on public record, except the parts that are on camera. Then I handed the reporter a flash drive containing the drone footage, the boundary hearing transcript, and the vandalism report. Facts don't care about fences, I said, and walked back inside. That clip aired that night. And by the next morning, Karen wasn't just infamous in our cul-de-sac. She was a meme. Someone online dubbed her Fence Karen. Another account edited the news clip with dramatic music, zooming in on her yelling at the officers. It went viral locally, tens of thousands of views. The HOA tried to issue a joint statement, distancing themselves from her, but it only made things worse. Neighbors began avoiding her. Delivery drivers stopped pulling into her driveway. Even the mail carrier switched her drop point to the community mailbox. Karen went from queen bee to social leper in less than a week. Then she snapped. It started small, trash tossed over the fence, garden hose left running toward my yard. But then one night I came home to find my fence painted. Thick streaks of red spray paint spelling thief across 3 panels. I checked my cameras. There she was at 2:13 a.m., hoodie pulled tight, can in hand. The sheriff came out again. When they confronted her, she denied it, then claimed she was sleepwalking. The officer, clearly exhausted, just sighed and filed another report. She wasn't arrested, but the HOA finally called an emergency board meeting to address repeated disruptive behavior by a member. I attended, not as a participant but as an observer. The room was packed, neighbors whispering, the air thick with tension. Karen stood at the front, arms crossed, facing the board like a defiant politician under investigation. The president, her ex-husband Harold, read a list of complaints: harassment, false claims, vandalism, and misuse of HOA resources. When he finished, Karen shouted, "You're all cowards! You're letting him destroy our neighborhood." June, the elderly neighbor, raised her hand. "No, dear. You did that all by yourself." The room erupted in murmurs. Harold called for order. Then he did something I didn't expect. He stepped down as president, right there, and recommended that Karen's membership be revoked entirely. The motion passed unanimously. She stood frozen, eyes wide, like someone had just erased her name from existence. "You can't do this," she whispered. Harold sighed. "We just did." She stormed out, slamming the door so hard the blinds rattled. The following days were eerily quiet. No more notes, no more drones, no more music. It was like the neighborhood exhaled for the first time in months. I rebuilt the vandalized section of fence, repainted it, and even planted lavender along the base to cover the smell of spray paint. For a brief moment, peace returned. Then came the moving truck. A massive U-Haul, parked in her driveway early one morning. I watched from my window as workers carried boxes and furniture out of her house. Karen stood by the door, directing them with the same rigid control she'd tried to exert over everyone else. She didn't look defeated, just hollow. Later that afternoon, as the truck doors slammed shut, she walked to the fence one last time. I met her halfway. "Leaving for good?" I asked. She nodded slowly. "You won, I guess." "I didn't want to win," I said. "I just wanted you to stop." She looked at me for a long moment, then said quietly, "You built a wall, and now everyone loves you for it. Maybe I just wanted someone to build one for me." Then she turned and walked away. The truck pulled out a few minutes later, tail lights disappearing down the street. For the first time in a year, the air felt still. I thought it was finally over. But that night, as I stood on the porch sipping coffee, my security light flicked on. Something moved near the fence. I walked closer and found a small wooden box resting on the ground. Inside was a single item, one of my original orange property markers, the one she'd stolen months ago. No note, no message. Just that. I stood there under the pale light, unsure if it was apology or warning. But I knew this much. Whatever it meant, it was her last word. Or at least, I hoped it was. For the first week after Karen moved out, the silence was almost unnerving. The absence of her voice, her SUV, even her perfume wafting from across the hedge made the street feel unreal, like the neighborhood had been hollowed out. Everyone walked a little lighter, smiled a little easier. Even Max, my dog, stopped barking at the fence for the first time in months. It was peace, but the kind that feels temporary, like a truce after a war where no one signed the treaty. Her house sat empty, blinds drawn, for sale sign posted on the lawn. I didn't pay it much attention until one morning when a black SUV rolled up and two people stepped out. A man in his 40s with a beard and mirrored sunglasses, and a woman about my age, clipboard in hand. Realtors, I assumed. They toured the property for almost an hour. The man kept pointing toward my fence, the woman taking note. When they finally left, I felt a strange unease I couldn't explain. A week later, the sold sticker appeared on the sign. The neighborhood gossip mill spun instantly. June called me that evening to say she'd heard the buyers were a young couple from the city. She sounded relieved, almost celebratory. "Maybe we'll finally have normal neighbors," she said. "Normal sounds good," I replied, though something in my gut disagreed. The moving truck arrived 2 weeks later. The couple, Ethan and Lila, were polite enough at first. He was an engineer, quiet, always checking his phone. She was warm, smiling, but with that brisk confidence of someone used to getting their way. When I walked over to welcome them, Lila thanked me but didn't shake my hand. She kept glancing at the fence behind me. "So that's the famous wall," she said with a half-smile. "I guess you heard about that," I replied. "Everyone did," she said. "Karen left quite the legend." "She left more than that," I muttered. The first few weeks were uneventful. No disputes, no notes, no sirens. But small things began to feel off. One morning I found the gate latch undone, even though I always lock it. Another day, my motion lights started triggering at odd hours, though the cameras showed nothing. Then, one evening, I heard voices near the fence. I stepped outside quietly. Ethan and Lila were standing by the fence on their side, flashlights aimed at the ground. Ethan was crouched, digging near one of the posts. "Everything okay?" I called out. They froze. Lila looked up first. "Oh, sorry. We were just checking drainage," she said too quickly. "In the middle of the night?" She laughed. "We both work late hours." Ethan avoided eye contact. "We're just making sure water doesn't pool near the property line." I nodded slowly. "You should be fine. That line's been professionally marked, twice." They both went still for a second, then mumbled a goodnight and went inside. The next morning, I walked out to check. The soil near the fence was freshly turned. Nothing obvious, but something had been buried or unburied. I felt that old familiar tension creeping back in, the kind that makes you start double-checking locks for no reason. That afternoon, I visited June. She poured tea and said, "Lila's been asking about you. Said she wanted to know more about what happened with Karen." "Did you tell her?" "Only that it got messy." June hesitated, then added, she seemed interested. Not curious, but like she wanted details she could use. The unease deepened. That night, I decided to check my security footage. At 1:47 a.m., the camera near the fence caught Ethan again. This time alone, kneeling, flashlight in hand, digging deeper. Then, something glinted in his palm. A small metal object. He pocketed it, stood, and looked toward my house before walking back inside. I zoomed in on the still frame. It wasn't clear, but it looked like one of those survey stakes, the same kind Karen had stolen and returned months later. I barely slept. The next day, I knocked on their door. Lila answered, smiling as if nothing was wrong. "Morning. Need something? Just wondering if you've been digging near the fence again." Her smile didn't falter. "Not since the drainage check." "Funny," I said. "Because my camera says otherwise." For the first time, her expression hardened. "You record our property?" "I record my fence. Your husband was on my side." She folded her arms. "Are you accusing us of something?" "Not yet. Ethan appeared behind her. "What's going on?" "Ask your wife," I said, and walked off before the conversation turned ugly. That evening, a letter appeared in my mailbox. No name, no return address, typed neatly. "You think you've won, but you don't even know what's under your fence." I stared at it for a long time, trying to decide whether it was a prank or something more. I forwarded the photo to my lawyer, Ellen. She replied within minutes, "Don't engage. Document everything." So I did. Every night, I logged timestamps of noises, light triggers, and movement. For 3 nights, nothing. On the 4th, the motion light caught something new, a shadow moving between the fence posts, slower than a person. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside. The air was still, heavy with dew. As I approached the fence, I noticed one of the boards slightly ajar. When I pulled it back, I found a small cavity in the soil. Inside it, a sealed envelope wrapped in plastic. My name was written on it in looping cursive. Karen's handwriting. I hesitated before opening it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, yellowed at the edges. "If you're reading this, someone sold you my house. Don't trust them. They know about the markers. The fence hides more than a boundary. It hides what they paid me to forget." No signature. No explanation. Just those words. I stood there, pulse hammering, unsure what to make of it. Was it another of her manipulations? Or had she stumbled onto something she wasn't supposed to find? The next morning, Ethan and Lila's SUV was gone. The driveway empty. A single curtain fluttered in their window. I waited all day, nothing. By nightfall, I called June. She hadn't seen them either. 2 days later, a county truck showed up. 2 men in orange vests started marking utility lines near the fence. I went out to ask what they were doing. One of them checked his clipboard. "Routine check," he said. "Anonymous request for underground inspection." Anonymous. Of course. When they left, I noticed they'd flagged the exact same area where Ethan had been digging. That night, I dug. The soil was soft, easy to move. About 2 feet down, my shovel hit something metallic. I brushed the dirt away and found an old steel box, rusted but intact. I pried it open with a crowbar. Inside were papers, deeds, maps, letters, all bearing the same name, Hutchins, and among them, a folded check receipt from a land survey firm, dated over 15 years ago. The amount, $25,000. The memo line read, "Revised Boundary Agreement." My head spun. Karen hadn't been delusional. She'd been bribed, or coerced, into signing away part of her property years ago. And whoever bought her house probably knew it. I spent the rest of the night scanning every document. It looked like the HOA itself had manipulated property maps to expand its jurisdiction years back, then buried the evidence, literally. Suddenly, her paranoia made terrible sense. When dawn came, I realized Ethan and Lila weren't random buyers. They were cleanup. People sent to find what Karen might have left behind. And now they knew I had it. I didn't sleep after finding the box. I sat at the kitchen table, every document spread out like a crime board, dawn creeping through the blinds. The deeper I read, the worse it got. The revised boundary agreement wasn't just an HOA trick, it was a cover-up. Years ago, the HOA had illegally absorbed parcels along the lakefront to inflate property values for resale. Karen's husband, Harold, had overseen the paperwork as president. And Karen, always desperate to keep control, had signed the fraudulent agreement to protect him when the county started asking questions. The $25,000 check was her payoff. That meant the fence I'd built, her supposed obsession, didn't just expose her insecurity. It exposed her biggest secret. I couldn't tell whether she'd buried the box out of guilt or fear. But someone knew it was here. And if Ethan and Lila were involved, they hadn't come to live next door. They'd come to erase evidence. By sunrise, I'd made 3 copies of every document and hidden them in different places. One in a lockbox at the bank, one on a flash drive mailed to my lawyer, and one inside a sealed envelope taped beneath my porch railing. If anything happened to me, the truth wouldn't vanish. Around 8, I saw the black SUV return. It parked in their driveway, engine idling. I watched from the window as Ethan stepped out and scanned the street before walking to my fence. He crouched by the post where I'd unearthed the box the night before. Then he stood up slowly and looked straight toward my window. He knew. A few minutes later, he knocked on my door. When I opened it, he was calm, almost polite. "Morning," he said. "Mind if we talk?" I let him in. He didn't sit. He looked around my kitchen like he was mapping exit. "I think you found something that doesn't belong to you." I leaned against the counter. "You mean the evidence your friends buried 15 years ago?" He didn't flinch. "Those documents were sealed for a reason. The people involved are gone. It doesn't concern you. It concerns everyone who's had their property boundaries shifted without consent," I said. "Karen was covering for your employers. That fence didn't just divide land, it exposed your fraud." He smiled slightly. "You think anyone's going to believe that? She's a laughingstock. You're a guy with a camera and a grudge. We'll deny everything. Already sent copies to the county and my attorney," I lied. That wiped the smile off his face. "You shouldn't have done that." Before I could reply, Lila appeared at the door, pale and tense. "Ethan, let's go," she said sharply. He hesitated, then muttered, "We're not finished." When they left, I watched their SUV vanish down the street. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but adrenaline. I didn't trust that they were really gone. Sure enough, that night, my security camera pinged again. 2 figures near the fence. Same SUV parked with its lights off. I stayed in the dark, watching through the window as they moved along the property line, flashlights darting. Only this time, they weren't digging. They were pouring something. When they left, I went outside carefully. The smell hit me before I saw it. Gasoline, slick on the soil. A line of accelerant trailing straight along the fence. I grabbed the hose, dousing the ground until the smell faded. Then I called the sheriff. By the time deputies arrived, the SUV was long gone. They took samples, photographs, and statements. The officer, same one who'd handled Karen's earlier fire attempt, just shook his head. "What is it with this property line?" "I'm starting to think it's cursed," I said. The next morning, I woke to a knock at the door. Not the sheriff, not the neighbors, a reporter. Same one from Channel 7 who'd covered Fence Karen. She smiled apologetically. "We got a tip there's been new trouble at your address." I hesitated, then invited her in. "You might want the full story this time," I said. By noon, her camera crew was back. I gave her the sanitized version. No talk of bribes or hidden documents, just the fact that the new owners were continuing Karen's harassment. She filmed the scorched soil, the police report, the fence still standing strong. When the segment aired that evening, something changed. Viewers didn't just see another neighborhood feud, they saw a pattern. Karen's downfall, the mysterious buyers, the intimidation, it all clicked. Within 24 hours, the county zoning office called me directly. "We need to see the documents you mentioned," the investigator said. "There's reason to believe they tie into an active fraud case." That night, I handed over copies of everything. 3 days later, police cruisers returned, not to my house but to Ethan and Lila's. They searched the property for 3 hours. The SUV was impounded. The couple was escorted out in handcuffs, faces covered. The next morning, the headline hit every local paper. "New homeowners arrested in HOA fraud investigation." Apparently, Ethan wasn't an engineer. He was a consultant for the very development firm that had funded the HOA's land expansions years ago. Lila was listed as a real estate compliance advisor. Together, they'd been sent to recover buried evidence tied to zoning bribes and falsified boundary map. Karen hadn't been their victim. She'd been their liability. When the county unsealed the records, they confirmed it. 15 years ago, the HOA had extended its reach illegally, converting buffer zones into community property. Karen's driveway was one of the fabricated lines. Her house had been their first adjusted parcel. No wonder she'd fought so hard to protect it. It wasn't entitlement, it was guilt. Over the next few weeks, the story spread beyond the county. Fence Karen, once a meme, became a cautionary tale about corruption buried under suburban calm. Neighbors came to me like pilgrims to a shrine, shaking their heads saying, "Guess you were right all along." But victory didn't feel clean. I kept thinking about the note she left, the one about hiding what she was paid to forget. She hadn't written it to threaten me. She'd written it as a confession. One evening, I walked along the fence again, lavender brushing my knees, the boards casting long shadows in the sunset. The wood was weathered now, the stain fading in spots. I ran my hand across it and realized something strange. It had become more than a barrier. It was a line of truth carved into the earth, proof that sometimes boundaries are the only way to reveal what's hidden. June joined me by the gate, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. "You think she ever meant for this to happen?" she asked quietly. "No," I said. "I think she just wanted to win one last argument. She didn't realize she was building her own evidence." June nodded. "Funny thing about fences, they keep things out, but they also hold things in." A week later, the county sent a demolition notice. Karen's house would be seized and torn down as part of the fraud case. I watched the excavator roll in, its claw tearing through her porch, the walls collapsing in clouds of dust. When the machine reached the backyard, something metallic glinted in the dirt. For a moment I thought it might be another box. But when the workers dug it up, it was just an old mailbox, rusted shut. Inside were letters, dozens of them, addressed but never mailed. All from Karen to the county, the HOA, even the local paper. Pleas for them to fix the mistake. Proof that she'd tried to undo what she'd helped create, but no one had listened. I asked to keep one letter. The county agreed. It sat on my mantel, beside the first fake violation notice she'd ever given me, the one I'd framed as a joke. Now it wasn't funny anymore. It was history. Weeks passed. The lot next door turned to bare dirt, the fence standing alone like a scar between 2 lives that had collapsed for the same reason, pride disguised as ownership. One evening, as the sun dipped below the trees, I walked out one last time and read the small note I'd tacked to the final fence post, the only memorial she'd get from me. "Property boundaries are simple. People aren't." Max barked once, chasing a squirrel across the yard. The air was quiet again, but this time it wasn't the uneasy silence of fear. It was peace earned the hard way. I looked at the horizon where Karen's house used to stand, took a deep breath, and went inside, closing the door for good. Because the war was over. And the line, finally, had held.